your front row seat to the future of mobility. The story of physical AI has often been sold as one of replacing labor. My next guest, though, is not coming for that job. He's building the newest Coworker. In the vineyards and raspberry fields, Burro is forging new paths, autonomous systems that are rugged enough for the grit, affordable enough for the orchard, smart enough to work side by side with a human being. My guest, Kevin Leiter, COO of Burro.AI, stands on the edge of a world where the best grapes you may end up eating depend on a robot having helped pick them. Today on Disruption Drive, here we are to discuss the dirty, dusty, and brilliant reality of off-road farm autonomy. Let's get into it. Kevin, thanks for coming on the show. And I want to start with a simple question. You're really building space age technology, that's completely autonomous, but you're deploying it on a Stone Age path. So let me ask you very, very broadly. Look, is off-road autonomy that much harder, or is it way ahead, more mature than, let's say, yard trucks and robotaxis?
Interesting question. I think it's hard to compare challenges, like the magnitude of challenges in different use cases, but I think the challenges in off-road are certainly unique and different than the challenges of on-road or even yard vehicles. Or mainly the variety in lighting and the variety in the environment, and then the lack of infrastructure. So you can imagine, when you drive down the street, you have signs that are very regular, you have lane lines that are very regular, and lots of technology are able to sense that infrastructure. On a farm, all bets are off. You could have a stray dog running across your robot. You could be in the middle of a downpour. The next morning, the whole field could be covered in snow. And imagine waking up in an unknown area. Everything yesterday was green and sunny, and then the next day it's covered in snow, and you're supposed to know exactly where you are and how to navigate. So the lack of infrastructure and kind of standardized sensing devices or standardized ways to localize and where you are. That's really the challenge with off-road. And then you couple that with areas of GPS signal degradation or completely GPS denied areas, which will happen many times in agriculture and other settings.
But you do promise 24/7 availability. So how do you do that? What happens when, let's say, a burro does not work or need maintenance, or what do you offer as a burro, and how does it help the farmer?
Yeah, we're offering essentially
And
an
across all
autonomous.
seasons, all weathers, all types of, yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So I think what we offer our customers is a tangible tool that does a job, right? And that job existed before Burro. The job will exist after Burro, and it's really, you need to move stuff around. So you either have a tractor, you have a person, you have something that is moving stuff around. I think the trick is you have to get into the field and understand why is a person moving that stuff today. There's almost always a reason, and in grapes, table grapes as an example, the physical confines or the physical space that you need to travel are just very tight, and there are no tractors that are efficiently able to be used in that sort of physically narrow environment. So our trick was get in the field, understand the true pain points, understand why humans are necessary to do certain jobs today, and then think very critically about, how can we automate portions of that job to deliver positive value to the customer. At the end of the day, the customer is going to buy if it makes them money or it saves them money. If it doesn't, then it's not going to work.
So tell me about that, right? How does the burro, deploying a bunch of burros on a farm, how does that help the farmer? What is that case for? Does it help them? How does it help get better yields?
Yeah, so first, the major problem in almost all agricultural environments globally is the shortage of labor, shortage of skilled labor specifically. So these jobs are not getting filled. You talk to growers, like literally around the world, they can't hire enough people to harvest the fruit that they need to harvest in the time that they need to harvest it. So at a certain point, we just need better tools and more efficient machinery just to make some of these fruit markets or fruit commodities viable in the countries that are grown today. And that's primarily from a labor perspective. So what we're doing is we're not replacing anyone, as you mentioned earlier on. What we're doing is we're taking portions of the job that are least ergonomic, least valuable to the workers, most harmful, if you want to put it that way. And we're taking those jobs and we're leaving the people in the fields to do the really difficult stuff that really humans should continue to do. So it's really all about right sizing the solution to the value that you deliver. And in our case, we're in a classic harvest setting. We're effectively replacing somebody pushing a wheelbarrow 500 meters back and forth. Instead of doing that, they stay at the vine, they get to pick more grapes, and they get paid more because they're picking more grapes.
And you're agnostic to the type of it's your off-road, so it goes on various different types of soil and can navigate itself to an off-road environment as well. But let me actually ask you your specific question on the types of farms you service, because you are targeting the specialty crop market, which one would argue is very fragmented. They do have the highest labor needs, but they tend to be fairly diffused. And so, how are you building this customer base or even market penetration in a fairly diffused manner?
Oh, it's difficult. I think we made a decision to start in a niche that allowed us to prove out our technology. And now we're very much in the mode of the product works. Let's go find adjacent markets or adjacent use cases to expand the utility of the product. So you think about if you're only used to pick grapes or harvest grape season, that's 3 to 4 months out of the year. If you're not functional, if you don't have capabilities outside of those 4 months, it's very, very difficult to give a customer a positive return on their investment. So after we proved the technology in the niche, and our niche was table grapes grown in Central California, so it's like literally the niche of a niche. Now, there are some benefits to that. As a smaller company, the market size of table grapes in Central California was substantial enough for us to get our footing, right? And almost all the top growers in the country in the US are located within 100 miles of each other. So the customer base is very, very consolidated, albeit small. So really, like our objective has shifted over time. The initial objective, start small, prove the technology, prove the product works. Now we are adding capabilities to the robot to make it more useful year-round to that customer base. And then the next phase will be adding additional functionality to that robot or additional capabilities to the robot to get out of agriculture and other outdoor spaces.
That's an interesting point, and I do want to get to how you're doing that and how you're expanding, how the functionalities of the robot need to change with season. But I do want to ask you something very specific, because one of the big challenges in new market entry for autonomy is the training cost. And you have a very innovative way of training your robot, which is simply follow the human. How does this work? I mean, does the human have to demonstrate? What does the human have to do, and what does the robot learn?
Yeah. Again, I think take this as a starting point, and that gets built on over time. So how we train our robots in the classic or the initial way, again, in a table grape field vineyard in Central California, when the user is picking a different section of the field every single day. The user, in that case, needs a quick way to train new routes hourly or daily, right? That's why we built our training methodology the way that we did initially. So because the routes had to change every single day, because the routes were, tens or 100 meters long as opposed to miles, and because of I'll call it the technical skill level of the users, the lowest barrier to entry or the lowest kind of setup cost method we could come up with was literally have a person walk the route that you want the robot to walk. and then you set the robot to go, and it does that route all day long. Technically, how that happens, we're just tracking an individual person with our cameras. The robot stays a certain distance behind the person, but the person doesn't have to do anything in particular. As long as they're not sprinting left and right to get out of the camera view, we should be tracking them.
But how do you handle edge case, or are they? Does it already have a library of edge cases, regardless of what the human being does?
In terms of if the human
Right. For example,
frames
you
a
need
path that's going to crash into something.
something like that, or
Yeah.
a stray dog runs over the field or something like that. Human.
Yep. Yeah. So training the route is the first step, but our perception stack is running throughout the entire time the robot's in any sort of autonomy mode. So despite the route, if the route is blocked by something, our product senses that, will stop and wait for it to move. There are certain situations and certain use cases where we enable obstacle avoidance, which is essentially it will stop for an obstacle and then try to drive around it, even if that means it drives off its train path and then go back to the same path. But in most cases, we found users prefer to have the robot stay on the path and wait for it to be
Right.
clear
Right.
rather than deviate into an unknown area.
So really, the robot's learning the route that that the human being is taking, and then
Yep.
how does the robot need to be reconfigured or appended in several ways when it's a new season or a new occasion or an adjacent market that you need to then now support?
Yep. Yeah, sure. So we've kind of branded that their initial way to train robots as pop-up autonomy. So you don't need anything. You set up a base station on a tripod, and then you train a route by walking. Right? It's very, very quick, very easy. Now, as we've expanded into different use cases, and in this case specifically into large commercial nurseries or greenhouses, again, the job is different. The job is more regular. Those facilities are laid out in a permanent way in the sense that you have digital train tracks everywhere, or you have roads, you have some infrastructure, although it's not consistent across sites. So in this case, the user needed a solution to set kind of permanent routes, right? Not temporary, not pop-up routes used for a day, but routes that would sustain years. And then they could choose which routes to travel throughout the day or throughout the year. So in this case, again, just by staying close to our customers, we took a robot that had mobility. We gave it a bunch more power so it could tow 5,000 pounds. Then we introduced that to our customer base and realized, like, oh man, this is like totally impractical to train on a daily basis. You're gonna have someone walk 20 miles of routes every single day just to lay out the infrastructure required to train. So instead, since that wasn't gonna work, we had to develop a new way to train our robots. And I don't know if it's necessarily the most novel way of doing it, but it is effective for our users, and it's I think that's the secret sauce is it's right size for the skill level of our users.
And on
In this
that,
case, you can have like a web-based map essentially of your facility. You can add stations. You can say robot go here, go to station A, go to greenhouse B. So that is more of our sustained training option.
And on that note of right sizing, you're actually engineering for affordability. You're not, of course, you're offering a premium disruption on the farm, but you're definitely engineered to be affordable, to be used by, a layman, really. So how do you do that? Because, if you're obviously building very high-end technology, but what is the operational efficiency that you're implementing on your side to actually make this very affordable, or you're making those trade-offs on what not to build?
Yep. Yeah, that's a tricky topic, right? We struggle with that, and I think we also succeed in that challenge many times. Like fundamentally, our hardware and our software, but I think hardware in this case is a little bit more important. To drive efficiency, you need to have some volume in hardware. That's just the name of the game operationally. If you have volume, you have a lot of options on how to get efficient. If you don't have volume, it becomes very difficult to do it efficiently. So everything in our company is built off of like how do you create ubiquitous volume in a niche market. So it's difficult, but it is possible. In our case, our hardware is very modular, I should say. We have our Harvest Assist use case, which doesn't require a whole lot of high-end sensors. We have a hardware product that is, again, right-sized in terms of cost for the value that it would deliver in that use case. And then in other use cases where the technical requirements are stronger and need additional sensors or different additional technology, we have an efficient way to add those modules into our product for those specific customers. So I think, you take 80% of our business, although we sell to a wide variety of people, 80% of the product is essentially common, and that last 20% is custom sized for the value that we can deliver in a particular use case at a particular customer site.
Do you also add any? I mean, I'm assuming since it's a robot and has sensors, does the farmer himself or herself also have the ability to read or visualize some of the data that it's capturing?
Absolutely. We have tons of data. I think our problem is how do you use that data more so than how to collect that data. But so we have a couple ways that are customer facing. One is we have a real time portal essentially that you can log into and see everything that the robot sees, see all the diagnostic data in real time, and then it also records it. So that platform we use is actually Formant, which is a pretty common third-party robotics portal solution. So we have the ability to receive and, in hindsight, kind of diagnose issues. I think our challenge is when you have massive amounts of data coming in at real time, what do you pay attention to and what don't you pay attention to?
Well, I'm assuming you're doing things like data offloads at some level, which is hard.
Yep, yep, and there's costs to everything, right? Our robots today primarily connect over cellular network. So if you're sending tons of data back off the robot, you're going to have a high cellular bill.
And how do you solve for that? Because it's a cellular that one is the data offloads, the other is charging as well. I'm assuming the farmer has to take that on. Is there a total cost? Because on the question of affordability, how do you communicate that total cost of ownership, and then maintenance, of course, for the robot because it's working on very rugged terrain.
Yep.
How does that add up? Yeah.
It's very similar to the electric vehicle versus internal combustion engine
And
decision
parts.
process or logic where in cars, yes, exactly. We, as an electric vehicle, our fuel cost or energy cost is closer to 10%, probably way less than that now, as a ICE engine would consume in fuel. Yeah, and then similarly, it's just a much more simple machine, right? So the maintenance should be significantly lower than any sort of legacy tractor that is on site. I say that because I think that is true. However, the maintenance is different. So sometimes just the fact that it's different maintenance is a challenge. You need different skill sets, different people potentially.
Right.
So I don't want to imply that there's no maintenance or that the maintenance is super easy, but it is substantially lower than the required maintenance on any sort of internal combustion vehicle. And then, of course, with the fuel prices, the way that how volatile the fuel prices are, some of that goes into the cost of electricity, but in general, electricity is much more affordable than fuel.
Yeah, fair enough. And I did want to, I don't, you of course started with harvesting, but do you, as you enter new markets and so on, I mean, do you aim to create, so you're largely closed loop fleet company maximizing reliability because you're relatively vertically integrated, or you're building an autonomous mobility layer on top of farm implements? I mean, you've started with the wheelbarrow, but tomorrow you could go into any sort of mobility ecosystem, including tractors.
Yep.
What's your
We're very much a mobility platform that is intended to cut across many different uses. So
So you're going to build a
today we
mobility layer across different types of transport mechanisms.
absolutely, still staying in agriculture, but a good example of that is we have a mower that we can pull behind our robot. In this case, we designed that mower. I think the electric mower market is still a little bit I call it immature or
Yeah.
unestablished. And so there wasn't an available partner to build an appropriate mower for our size vehicle. So we did that ourselves. Now, the other example is crop spraying or vegetation management in general from either watering or spraying chemicals on crops. Those automated or smart sprayers exist today in the market. See and Spray is a big John Deere product. Many other providers and our partners like Weed It and On Target also have smart sprayers that don't have a autonomous mobility solution. So you can cut your chemical use down by 90% by using one of these sprayers, but you still need a person in a tractor
Right.
driving that sprayer around, breathing in those chemicals in some cases. So in that case, yes, we are the mobility layer for smart spraying companies to make it spraying a fully autonomous job.
So you integrate then with the OEMs or the manufactured, implements as well with the autonomy suite that Burro builds.
Exactly. Yes. And we expect to do a lot more of that going forward. I think we want to be that platform that other companies build their product on top of. And again, we have a variety of things in play, but there are a lot of implements on a farm. You need to scare birds. Sometimes you play music to scare the birds away.
That's
You need to
interesting.
spread ant bait. You need to mow the lawn. You need to mow the grass. You need to spray chemicals. You need to water stuff on occasion. There's so
And is
many
that
little
the hard
jobs.
part? Is that the hard part, getting that physical activity and not the code, I assume?
Yep, yep. Although when you break it down, almost everything needs to move,
Yeah.
right? And at least in the agriculture and outdoor settings, like it is the main challenge is that you aren't in the same location day in and day out. It is a sprawling job. So again, it's just about understanding the job to be done and making sure your product is right size to that job.
Absolutely. Well, that's sort of all we have time for today, but what we just learned is that challenges get resolved when people move. To deploy high tier intelligence into an environment that hasn't changed in centuries, maybe millennia, you cannot just stop with engineering, you have to be pragmatic. Burrow isn't building the most expensive sensor suite. They're succeeding because they've understood that on the vineyard, affordability is a functional requirement, not a pricing strategy. By turning the robot into a co-worker rather than a replacement, they've bypassed the, I want to say, brittleness of full autonomy and found a way to make space age tech thrive in the dirt. It turns out the future, or the path to the future, isn't paved. It's rugged, dusty, and it's finally becoming autonomous. Kevin Leiter, thank you so much for coming on the show. And those of you listening, thank you. This is Disruption Drive, and see you all next time.